In the early 20th century, Tibet was a region of profound spirituality and isolation, known for its unique culture and religious significance. However, the mid-century brought dramatic change. The story of how China captured Tibet is one of political maneuvering, military strategy, and enduring controversy. Tibet, nestled high in the Himalayas, had long been a theocratic society led by the Dalai Lama. It maintained a degree of independence, though it was often considered a part of China's broader sphere of influence. This dynamic began to shift dramatically after the establishment of the People's Republic of China in 1949 under the leadership of Mao Zedong. The Chinese Communist Party had clear intentions to consolidate all territories they considered historically Chinese, and Tibet was high on their list. In 1950, China began its efforts to bring Tibet under its control. They launched a military campaign known as the Peaceful Liberation of Tibet. This term, however, belied the aggressive and forceful nature of the operation. The initial stages saw the People's Liberation Army advancing into eastern Tibet. The Tibetan forces, poorly equipped and outnumbered, stood little chance against the modern and organized Chinese military. The conflict culminated in the Battle of Chando in October 1950. Chinese forces swiftly overwhelmed the Tibetan defenses, capturing the city and paving the way for further advances into the region. Following their victory at Chando, the Chinese government sought to legitimize their control over Tibet through diplomatic means. In 1951, the 17-point agreement was signed under duress by Tibetan representatives in Beijing. This agreement ostensibly granted Tibet autonomy within the People's Republic of China while recognizing Chinese sovereignty over the region. However, many Tibetans, including the Dalai Lama, felt the agreement was coerced and did not reflect their desire for genuine autonomy. Despite the agreement, tensions remained high. The Chinese government began implementing policies to integrate Tibet more thoroughly into the PRC. These included land reforms, attempts to diminish the influence of the monasteries, and infrastructure projects aimed at increasing connectivity between Tibet and other parts of China. Such policies often met with resistance from the local Tibetan population, who viewed them as direct attacks on their culture and way of life. Throughout the 1950s, dissatisfaction simmered beneath the surface. The situation reached a boiling point in 1959. By then, the resentment towards Chinese rule had grown significantly. A combination of cultural suppression, economic hardship, and political marginalization led to a widespread uprising in Lhasa, the Tibetan capital. The rebellion was marked by massive protests and armed resistance against the Chinese presence. In March 1959, tensions exploded into open conflict. The PLA responded with overwhelming force, quelling the uprising with brutal efficiency. The crackdown resulted in significant loss of life and further entrenched Chinese control over Tibet. In the midst of this turmoil, the Dalai Lama, fearing for his life and the future of his people, fled to India, where he was granted asylum. His departure marked a significant moment in Tibetan history, symbolizing the loss of hope for an independent or even an autonomous Tibet under Chinese rule. The aftermath of the 1959 uprising saw an even tighter grip by the Chinese government on Tibet. The CCP intensified its efforts to assimilate Tibet into the Chinese state. Monasteries were closed or repurposed. Traditional Tibetan practices were suppressed, and many Tibetans were relocated or imprisoned. The Cultural Revolution of the 1960s and 1970s further exacerbated these efforts, leading to the widespread destruction of Tibetan cultural heritage and significant suffering among the Tibetan people. Despite these hardships, the spirit of Tibetan resistance did not completely vanish. The Tibetan diaspora, led by the Dalai Lama, continued to advocate for Tibetan rights and autonomy from abroad. The Dalai Lama became an international symbol of nonviolent resistance and the Tibetan cause, garnering global support and attention. However, within Tibet, the Chinese government's policies and the presence of the PLA ensured that any organized resistance was swiftly and harshly dealt with. In the decades since the initial invasion, China has continued to maintain a firm hold on Tibet. Large-scale infrastructure projects such as the Qinghai-Tibet Railway have been built to integrate Tibet economically and logistically with the rest of China. While these projects have brought development to the region, they have also been criticized for facilitating the influx of Han Chinese into Tibet, thereby diluting the region's cultural identity. The Chinese government frames its control over Tibet as a liberation from feudalism and a path to modernization. They argue that their policies have brought economic development, improved living standards, and greater connectivity to a previously isolated region. However, critics, including many Tibetans, view these policies as a form of cultural genocide, aimed at erasing Tibetan identity and assimilating the population into a homogeneous Chinese state. Today, the Tibetan issue remains a contentious and sensitive topic. The Chinese government maintains strict control over information and expression within Tibet, making it challenging for outsiders to fully understand the situation on the ground. Internationally, the Tibetan cause continues to receive attention, particularly through the efforts of the Dalai Lama and various advocacy groups. However, the geopolitical realities and China's significant global influence have made it difficult to achieve any substantive change in Tibet's status. In summary, the capture of Tibet by China is a complex tale of military conquest, political maneuvering, and cultural struggle. It is a story that continues to evolve, reflecting broader themes of power, identity, and resistance in the modern world. The Tibetan people, despite decades of suppression, continue to hold on to their cultural heritage and identity, seeking a future where their rights and traditions are respected. The international community watches closely, but the path to resolving the Tibetan issue remains fraught with challenges and uncertainties.